All right, everyone, welcome to our discussion today on Are All NbS Just? Ensuring gender, inclusion, and diversity are front and center. Thank you for joining us on this really important topic. It's one that I'm particularly very interested in myself. To get things rolling, I'm Kaylin Potter. I'm GoGreenRoutes, a Horizon 2020 project's current project manager. And even before taking up the mantle of project manager, I've been actively involved in our gender, inclusion, and diversity panel for some time now, so I'm very excited to moderate this discussion. And to get started, I'll introduce all of our speakers today. First, we'll start with Shreya. Shreya works at ICLEA Europe, where she brings her environmental governance education into practice. With cities across Europe and different NbS projects, she has a keen interest in exploring the nexus between justice and NbS, and how, at their junction, the health benefits of nature connectedness can be made available to all. Within GoGreenRoutes, she works together with her research partner, Julia. At the University in Aachen, she works with cities to co-create NbS interventions using learnings from similar projects. Now, Julia will be our second speaker. She's a landscape architect and has been working in practice for more than 10 years, but she's been in research and teaching for about 6. She's currently working as a project leader in Landscape Architecture Office in Hamburg and at the University in Aachen in the project GoGreenRoutes, focusing on co-creation. Now, you'll also be joined today by some of our colleagues online. We have, for our gender inclusion and diversity panel, we have Ben, who's one of our co-leaders. We have Eveline, who will be joining as well shortly. And we have Annika, who is one of our city partners in the municipality in EMEA. And so Ben, he was originally trained as a registered nurse and is now a researcher at the University of Antwerp, working at the Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences. His research focuses on interdisciplinary planetary health. In addition, he serves as a Next Generation Network Fellow at the Planetary Health Alliance. Eveline, who'll be joining us shortly, works within the Knowledge, Information, and Research Department of EDV, and she is one of our project partners on GoGreenRoutes. She works alongside Ben quite closely in helping steer the GID panel. Annika is a Gender Equality and Strategic Development Officer at the municipality of Umeå in Sweden. Her main focus of work is gender in relation to social sustainability, urban planning, mobility, and climate change on the local level. Umeå is a city that has worked strategically with gender equality issues for more than 30 years, so we're very excited to have her opinion as well. And to kick us off, we'll be looking at the quick agenda for today. We'll have Shreya, who will introduce the topic and really set the stage. Julia will talk about temporary urbanism and seedbed interventions, as well as the NbS case of Lahti. We'll take a pause for some questions and answers, and then we'll launch into our more remote section with our online colleagues for an introduction to the GID panel and its outputs. We'll have some input from Umeå and Annika, and then we'll follow up with some additional questions at the end from the audience. So to kick us all off, I'll shoot it over to Shreya, and she'll get us going.
Thank you so much, Kaylin. And it's so exciting to be here and talk to you about this really important topic. So you must be questioning yourselves why we are doing what we are doing in this project. And we've heard from so many co-creation sessions before the importance of including the unusual suspects, the marginalized communities, and so on. But how do we do it in practice is something we'll be talking about today. But before we start, sorry, I switched it wrong. So before we start, I just want to quickly introduce the GoGreenRoutes project to you. It has a bit of a focus going into the co-benefits of nature-based solutions. So you've heard from most of the projects here, the sister projects, working very much on the urban regeneration topics. But here the focus is very much on trying to facilitate nature connectedness to foster health and well-being, which is really essential when it comes into, when we think about the social impacts as well. How do we make sure that that the nature that we are creating in the urban environments is actually available and also accessible to the people who most need it? So definitely something that we've been working on with the Gender Inclusion Diversity panel as well. Just to quickly talk about the project here, you can see there are so many different cities, and as you've heard before, there's some followers or front runners, and then goes into followers and so on. So we have the idea of putting it as cultivating cities, seed cities, and cross-pollination networks, and it's spread across all of Europe, but there's also some that you can see which is going beyond, and we are linking with them to understand what their needs are and what we can share with them on topics of improving nature connection as well. So we have a big consortium of 40 organizations, so it's a lot of different expertise. It's definitely one of the domains that, for me, definitely coming from ICLE, is really interesting, because we haven't so much contact with health professionals in general, and then to be able to do that with psychologists, with people you heard about Ben's background with as a nurse. So it's really, really interesting to see how we can use existing urban spaces, but also create more green urban spaces to foster this connection with nature, and specifically for health and well-being impacts. And these are being monitored over time as well. In the project, I just wanted to show a few key elements of the project. And so there have been a lot of work that has been going on. It's been almost 3 years, if I'm not mistaken. We have 1 more year to go and a lot to do still, but we've come to a point of having had quite a lot of research on nature connection as well. There's a lot of co-implementing in practice already with NbS that we'll talk about later. And there have been some digital tools. So I don't know if you've heard, but there's a lot of connection with health and digital tools and use of digital technology, or technology in general as well. So it could be in the sense of using sensors, it could be in the sense of kind of putting air quality monitoring devices, and we heard before about bat monitoring and so on. So there are a lot of these tools, but this particular tool that I just want to quickly say a few words about is the virtual reality showcase, which was something I was very critical about, but then being there and actually experiencing it personally, it felt like, okay, the people who can not actually access nature in real can also benefit from such virtual reality showcases, which simulates the environment, the natural environment, so that they can interact with those elements that are not really accessible because of their own, let's say, physical disabilities and so on. So definitely one thing. The other thing I would like to really mention is about the emotional mapping, for instance. I'm just picking out a few and talking a bit about them. So emotional mapping is also quite an interesting approach. I think some of the projects also mentioned that before, but here in this case it's really important because we are trying to facilitate nature connection and to be able to have the perceptions of the people recorded and to understand how do they connect their emotions to nature and how they feel about the presence, so that we get the buy-in of the people, so that we can actually do it bottom up as well. So to encourage them to use the nature and to also speak with the city officials to say, look, we would want it this way, or we would want it to be more for our, let's say, physical activity, or have some space which is more for meditation or yoga and so on. So definitely different perceptions come into play. And then we've had quite a number of fact sheets that we've published on cities, and there we have kind of looked more from the health perspective also to kind of look at how the populations in those 6 cities that are mentioned here, how has that been, and their statistics. We can share the links afterwards to that. And also a little bit then tying into the justice aspect, because you might be wondering where that is now. So you will hear more about the GID panel, but I just want to kind of say that this GID panel started it's a voluntary thing almost, right? So it's becoming formalized in the project, but it started with kind of the people who were engaged, passionate, and interested in the topic to come together with who have some background already with other projects, or they're connecting with their own organizations to do gender mainstreaming, or understanding the importance of how to communicate in gender-sensitive manner, but also how to plan events in a gender-sensitive manner as well, to ensure that everybody has access to those resources, but also availability to interact with the practitioners, researchers, and cities in events or in other spheres where they are interacting with the urban space, the green urban spaces as well. I always click the wrong button. So here you see a really nice representation of all the research that's been going on. It's a research and innovation action, so of course there's bound to be a lot of research that comes along. And it's been really interesting getting in touch with all the different PhD scholars who are looking at different aspects of people perception. So you can see here in the sense that citizen science is also one of the really key elements that one of our PhD candidates is looking at. But then what I would also like to point out is in Tallinn, where the park was being the kind of the center, or which is the the site-specific urban NbS that they are planning. There has been some research on the safety perceptions as well. How do the people that are using the space feel about the safety perceptions as well, or to understand what needs to be done differently, or also in the sense of, like, when you think about lighting parks, are you thinking about the biodiversity as well? You think about the bats, for instance, that have been around, and so on. So just to understand this aspect has been really interesting. And so just to show that, so there are a lot of our cool researchers on board. And yes, lastly, I just want to show you this map, which kind of is, somebody before was mentioning or kind of using the analogy of rivers and bends. So I just want to take that back and say that we've also kind of had the similar process, so to say, over time. We've started from a long process of kind of building a timeline, trying to understand how different research practices and NbS implementations kind of go together, and how we can actually start with a baseline and then be able to kind of monitor it over time. So this has been kind of a journey, and we are still on it. And you can see these different cities that are in place there, and the depictions or the illustrations also show the different varieties of urban NbS that they are planning and using for kind of inculcating the habit of people using the spaces. So in the case of Limerick, it's been a green corridor. In case of Umeå, it's been much more using the parking spaces, which have been transformed into actual parks, and so on. So that's just to introduce you to our work, and then I hand it over to Kaylin.
Yeah, thank you, Shreya, for really kind of introducing, setting the stage. And so Yulia will get us started talking a little bit more about a specific example of one of our seed cities, and then discussing a little more broader some of the larger learnings overall.
Yes, thanks. Just switching to here. Just give me a second. And yes, correct. Okay, so yeah, hello, I'm Julia. And actually today I would like to introduce to you all our beloved so-called seedbed interventions. Just one note here, there was a small typo last minute in our presentation. I'm not talking so much about temporary urbanism in per se, so to say. It's more focusing on our seedbed interventions. Otherwise we would sit here tomorrow, I think. But so let's start with our seedbed interventions. I will show you also some outcomes of them and will lead then to our NbS interventions, which are about to be implemented right now. Already, some of them are already implemented. And what is to say about seedbed interventions for today? I will apply the lens of gender, inclusion and diversity a bit, and will show how they fit our seedbed interventions into a sustainable development of a city for us, and also will explain to you that our seedbed interventions were implemented as a pre-NbS interventions in 6 cities. Shreya already mentioned them quickly, our 6 cities. There will also be the implementation of the NbS afterwards happening in these 6 cities. And the main difference between seedbed and NbS here for us is for sure that seedbed interventions are temporary. And from the beginning with our seedbed interventions, just to introduce our topic here, for us there was a big question standing in the room when we tried to develop this concept of seedbed interventions. We asked ourselves the question how to ensure equality in NbS implementation later onwards in our NbS implementation. And I also discussed a lot with Shreya and told from the beginning that we want to be a bit different here in developing our NbS interventions together with the city partners, and want to try as much as possible to concentrate and to focus on social parameters in a way, and to be as much as possible locally appropriate. And in this process we developed also for that purpose our seedbed interventions, and you can say that they are kind of experimental still, and they function as an experimental tool or mechanism to avoid inequality as much as possible in a way. So, I try this. Okay. So what are seedbed interventions overall? We were kind of free to define this concept ourselves because there was not such a thing as a seedbed intervention in research yet. Of course, the single elements and methods will seem familiar to you from participation processes and co-creation frameworks, but based on the needs of each city, we put specific elements together under one umbrella. And in doing so, we established our concept of the seedbeds. And as I mentioned, it still needs time to grow and needs to be further developed, but for now, it helped the city partners a lot. We got a lot of feedback from them, and also from our seed cities. They approached us with the wishes to implement seedbeds in their cities after we successfully implemented the 6 in the other cities. And we are quite a bit overwhelmed about that, I think. I can also speak for Shreya, I think, at this point. But let me say this one thing, there's no seedbed intervention without co-creation. And right from the beginning, we tried to, somehow involve the 6 city partners and their local stakeholders as well in every step. So we started in a way before even getting our heads wrapped around this concept in saying so. So we wanted to really understand how we make sure to implement inclusive and locally appropriate NbS interventions. So we tried with the seedbeds to find a way, as best as possible, to understand the situation on site first, and also, of course, the needs of the citizens. You can already imagine this is quite a long, complex process for us, even more complicated as some co-creation frameworks which were familiar to me until this point 3 years ago. So we tried to use this knowledge to co-create then the NbS afterwards together, but for the seedbeds, we defined some first parameters together. We said a seedbed intervention acts as a connector between different user groups. A seedbed intervention is in general temporary, as I mentioned earlier, which gives us some kind of freedom as well. And a seedbed intervention functions as a catalyst for discussion, for participation in a way. It's not per se a participation process, it's more like the catalyst for even getting things started in a way. And finally, a seedbed intervention depends most of all on the local actor, and all of them, not just a small group who are the loudest. We try to hear every voice, or at least try it in a way. So next. Yeah. Also, of course, we are approaching to frame a scientific framework, a definition for that as well. We are not at the end with that, but we try to find a first definition. And the concept of the seedbed intervention is fairly new and still emerging, as I mentioned. And it isn't yet a well-established scientific concept. And important to mention here is that that the seedbed interventions activates local debate, as you can see here in our really brief definition, and that it's all about gathering novel ideas from and with citizens. Right from the beginning. And also good to mention, also in the GRD context, that a seedbed intervention provides more or less a stimulus to propose, explore, debate, and also to raise awareness of a broad spectrum of topics in a way. And yes, okay. Furthermore, of course, you need to know what is to do, what there is to do for co-creating a seedbed intervention. And first of all, it's important to communicate the benefits of a co-creation process, because this was right at the beginning our big struggle, our biggest obstacle in a way, to approach the city partners 3 years ago and say, hey, let's do co-creation. I know a lot of you know that it's not an easy process, but yeah, we even came with more around the corner, so to say, and said, okay, let's do everything together. We don't want to provide you already a steady basis for that. We want to really, co-create the co-creation with you, more so to say. And also, it was really important to establish a clear vision together with different stakeholders, and I will come in a minute to the process of how we found all the stakeholders and everything. And of course, also important was to actively and interactively define key concepts together with the citizens. And biggest topic as well was to anticipate obstacles and before they arise. For that, we had a bunch of meetings, webinars, and everything during COVID time still, and later on also in person with the city partners and stakeholders. And last but not least, continue to nurture the co-creation process also within the seedbed interventions. After they were done, we still talk regularly with the city partners, also outside of the context of NbS implementation. Next one. Maybe, Kelly, you need to give me like a 1-minute warning before I'm out of time. So, okay. Then, So, how we, when we think back to my first question, when we started with all of that, we thought about how to make NbS more social, to hear really all the voices. So we thought that seedbed interventions can act as a mechanism to avoid inequality, and also in preceding the NbS and trying to be to function as an experimental format in a way, and co-producing with different stakeholders good sustainable NbS. It is really important here to ask ourselves who is included. We asked from the beginning, okay, we have this user group, we have this user group, etc. But who had a voice before we designed for the final process of formation of the public space? Are we really got a spectrum of different voices here? And how we can, I don't know, it's a familiar topic for all of us who are working in co-creation and participation, but we really try to tackle that really hard and in a lot of discussions. So this was our final question before we went there to the cities and really triggered this question, tackled this question, who had a voice looking into the future before we design our new public spaces. And also important to mention here is, of course, as a conclusion of what I just said, is to involve those who are not otherwise part of the urban planning process, and ask yourself who is already involved, understand who has a voice, what I just mentioned. And how we did that is that we came up with the idea, together with the city partners, together with our stakeholder group, to use creative methods. Because these creative methods allowed also to to hear the more quiet voices, so to say, in using, for example, photography methods, music method, etc. Not the method with music, but we used some elements of music to lighten up a bit the atmosphere during the seedbed interventions, etc. But more to that later, to our methods. And what I just mentioned before, what we did to prepare the cities in the whole development process.
1 minute warning.
1 minute warning. Okay, I speed up then. Okay, we did stakeholder mapping. We did regular meetings, as I mentioned, and we set up a local task force with all the city partners together in a really detailed process. Later more to that in the question round, but we had a lot of workshops, and also, as I mentioned, most important point, keep the communication ongoing also after all the interventions with the city partners. This was key for us. I think I have to skip that to come to the actual seedbed intervention methods, but we can talk about that later, maybe, hopefully. So just a short notice on our methods here. So after all, we came to the conclusion together with all participants that the following methods, we introduced them to a lot of methods. We tried to be as, open as possible to explain scientific methods on a really basic level, to reach also a broad audience, and just to highlight what are the positive benefits from that. And in the end, all cities agreed or said to us that surveys are a good tool to use as a method. We did use the photo voice method, which I can explain later, and we gathered ideas via sketches on a canvas. Used the canvas method together with the participants. Just a quick glimpse into one of our seedbed interventions. It happened in Limerick last summer. It was a really experimental, so to say, thing in a way, because it was one of our first seedbed interventions there, and we should try to organize all the methods I just mentioned on site during a really hot summer day in Ireland, which is really rare, and as you know. And basically, we are set up on the Castle Troy Greenway, which is a 1.4 kilometer long greenway which connects schools, housing areas, and other districts together. And as besides of this cycleway, we set up our tents, and we tried to convince the people to join our methods, which was at this point really hard because we still needed to learn a lot, but eventually we learned it and did it better at the next seedbed interventions. But yeah, just one closing thing. It's also important to set up a good scene around these methods I just mentioned, to create a really familiar, open, safe atmosphere in a way, to really motivate the people to share their voices, because it's not that, hey, you can share it, and then they share, even if we have those creative methods we had there. It was really sketches and really nice, easy ways to communicate, but we had this nice pavilions, we had coffee trucks, etc. So really to have a nice atmosphere is key there. So I stop now, and we can do the rest later on.
Wonderful, thank you, Julia. And I think it's really important to note with these seedbed interventions, being that they're this novel kind of, they gave us an opportunity to really create not only like what is a seedbed intervention, but I think when you think of co-creation, if you're starting with a blank slate and you're bringing all of these different voices to the table and saying like, okay, what do you want? That can be a really challenging proposition for a lot of people. But with these seedbed interventions that were designed to be temporary, you give them something to work with, and then people can say, I want to tweak this, or this would be more true to our region or our locality, that kind of thing. And so a big part of it has been the learnings that have come from it. And actually in the case of Limerick, their seedbed intervention, they had a lot of really positive feedback feedback from, they were able to take some things, tweak some things, but they've actually incorporated what they learned into the full NbS that has since been implemented. And so we're really excited to hear more about some of the other outcomes later. I'll hand it back over to Shreya, though, to talk about the specific NbS case in Lahti.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so now we talked a bit about the kind of setting the scene. How did we start with the seedbeds? Here we are. So these are some fresh pictures from 2 weeks ago, I think, where we had the health forest opening in Lahti. You might be thinking, yeah, in this case, there's not so much in terms of kind of infrastructure changes, but there have been based on what we heard from the seedbed interventions. But there were, you can see, there were quite a lot of people that actually joined this. But that is just to say that there has been a lot of interaction with the citizens over time, and the city has been pushing this health aspect quite a bit in their policies as well, and connecting with, for instance, if you might have heard about the doctor for planetary health, right? So there's really a lot of kind of connections that are going on there. And this was basically kind of an opening where people came from different parts. So this was not only the local, the neighborhood area that the people came from, but one thing which was really interesting was that they want to kind of promote that the local forest can also be your health forest, and how do we make that accessible to the people where they are, rather than just bringing the crowd to one concept that has been put into place. I hope I clicked the right one. Okay, so these are also a few more pictures. I talked about the VR showcase. You can see we had quite a lot of participation there as well, but you can also see some bits about the physical activity part. I know it's still a concrete setting, but definitely in that area it feels more natural to be participating in that. And also one of the kind of the requirements or the needs that the people, and I have to mention the hospital staff, because there's a hospital close by, and they were the ones who we consulted to actually know what they could see relevant in that area, and also what they could then promote to their patients to kind of like go on sensory walks. There's a lot of things cut out from here, but they had a very interesting approach of using guided sensory walks as well, and this yoga platform and providing guided meditation and yoga is something that actually some of the people who have been involved in this in the NbS intervention time, they even want to keep doing it over time, because they felt that actually people were very interested in it and they want to continue. So this collaboration was also seen. And one thing I also want to show a picture of this kind of steady pine trees, just about holding, embracing the tree and kind of feeling connected to nature is kind of a cue sometimes, because sometimes we are walking in nature, but like just to have some cues to reflect, to actually get closer is it's also helpful. So these were ideas that were collected in the seedbed interventions, and then these were implemented together with the city on site. I think that's it from my side.
Wonderful. Thank you, Shreya. So next, we'll take a little bit of time for some questions. And I have a couple of questions for Julia and Shreya first, but then we will drop it over to the audience. We'll probably only have time for about 1 or 2 questions this go around, but do know that after we've heard from our virtual colleagues, we will have a bit of extra time at the end. So feel free to ask away, and then if not, know that there will be some extra time to address your questions a little bit later. My first question is, though, for Shreya, and it's, was it difficult to include the GID perspective in practice?
Thank you so much. I thought a lot about this, but I have to say that once you will hear from our virtual participants or our colleagues who are joining online, you'll get to know a bit more about the GID perspective, so it might be difficult to grasp what is meant here. But just to kind of say with GID we mean gender inclusion and diversity. I think US takes a different approach with GDEI. I think there are different approaches to kind of integrate these to bring this concept forward, and we had this GID perspective. What we did was, I think it's been difficult, definitely, because when we talk to the cities, it's also about the time, the networks that they already have in place, who do they have to reach in order to kind of, get the diversity that we not only want to encourage the different voices. And you talked about the people who are sometimes, missing from the picture. So how to bring them forward was quite a difficult process. And we had a lot of kind of bilaterals with the cities and trying to understand how they can actually think about it as a standing agenda every time we talk. So how have you been talking to some new people? Have you been including some new people in your network? And always checking in with them was something. But definitely in practice, it's a challenge, and I think it will only be we see over time how it will develop with the other NbS implementations as well. But it has been quite a journey to talk to the cities, talk about the networks that they already have, and what is in for the other, like the kind of different stakeholder groups to participate, to actually join, because we talked about the fatigue, and we talked about the incentivization for their time and their engagement with us. So definitely some things were difficult to put into practice.
Thank you, Shreya. And Yuli, I'm very glad we added this question, because we've discussed, as you mentioned already, there's a lot of unique elements to the seedbed interventions themselves. But is there anything you'd like to add? What did you find, if you hadn't had a chance to address it already, what else did you find that is most unique about the seedbed interventions?
I mean, I can just speak for myself, but what I find out in the end that, of course, the fact that it's a NbS intervention concept, so to say, is quite unique, and also having in mind to ensure equality and that we somehow make NbS more social in a way. Along that fact is quite unique, I think, with seedbeds. But for me, I think the most important thing is to mention that we somehow, I don't know, succeeded in creating a concept together with the cities and the stakeholders, which directly connected, it sounds a bit emotionally, but with the hearts with the citizens in a way, because as I mentioned earlier, somehow all the pieces came together, and there were a lot, there are more than we even mentioned, but in the end, as I mentioned, they came up to us and said, okay, let's do a seedbed. And they didn't say, let's do a participation process thing, or can you please hear what I have to say? They just said, let's do a seedbed. How do I do that, Julia? Shreya. And then it was like, okay, we still need some time. We need some, I don't know, not a guideline. We just need the seedbed, I don't know, not another tool. It's just, I think, working for itself, like a seedbed. So, and we're still figuring out how that worked together with the NbS, which are about to be implemented. But for that, we are analyzing that in our next task in our storybooks right now. So a bit in between at the moment. So yeah.
Wonderful. Well, and this is a question for both of you. And I will say, in the interest of time, so we can make some space for audience questions as well, we'll try to get this in like 90 seconds or less, yeah? So what have been your greatest learnings in putting GID into practice? Who'd like to go first?
Just a quick thing. I was really overwhelmed when we were doing like a workshop in Barcelona together with a few of the city partners, and we just tackled all the topics which are also not really familiar to them, and they were so open about that. They were like, okay, why it's not a safe space here for a certain user group then? And we could talk really openly about every also anxious argument they maybe put forward, and we could discuss on a really open level, so to say. And this was really nice, and in the end we came along together, and did a good job, I think. So I think for me the greatest learning was to
contextualize it culturally as well, because sometimes it's not a one-size-fits-all. So we also heard, like, in some cases, the city said, oh, but like, you definitely need to use the title element when you collect data about, like, who's joining, in the case of Germany, for instance, like always having this and so on. But like in some others, they said, oh, but we don't do that. So there were a lot of like different points that we had to figure out. And we said, okay, then we make kind of tips on how or what you could include in your communication, in your event management, and so on. So that was a great learning to put it into the cultural context as well.
Wonderful, really great learnings. And so next, we'll take it to the audience to see if anyone has any questions. You'll go second. Yeah, first, second.
Thank you. I'm David. I work for London Wildlife Trust in London. We do a lot of work and have been for some time considering community empowerment, breaking down power structures, recognizing institutional racism in the environment sector, particularly in the environmental charity sector. And in doing so, we have started to realize that some of the language that is used just by default, without realizing it, is completely part of the power imbalance. So if you're going to really engage with community empowerment, as we are trying to do in community organizing, we need to really start to consider language. For example, the word nature conservation. I work in the nature conservation sector. The word conservation means over here, kept out. You're allowed in when we say so. Native species, non-native, invasive species. That the list goes on in terms of the language that we use. We work with local authorities. We work with regional authority. So when communities are engaged with us and start feeling this kind of level of language thrown at them without us realizing it, but we've started to realize that it's completely a huge part of the problem. So my question is, have you considered language, and was it part of your understanding as you were building seedbed programs? What considerations you had for language that you were using? It might not be, obviously people are speaking 5 different languages in the projects you're working on, but there must be similar kind of language issues, barriers, power imbalances.
So maybe not a direct answer to your question, but maybe Shreya can add to that afterwards. I can just say that we, right from the beginning, we thought about graphic language as well, how to use that in the end to present all the results out of the seedbed interventions, how to communicate during the process of developing them, and we, we did try to do our best to do it as graphic as possible, but also as easy understandable as possible to communicate to a broader audience with our documents we handed out afterwards. We did a lot of flyers, like hand sketches like you saw them, put it into the report. We managed to not, in the end, wrap everything up in a 50 pages Word document without pictures, so that also afterwards, the audience can take this document to themselves and, is, so to say, keen about to read it, to maybe hand it out to another person, say, here, look, it's motivating to read it, etc. And maybe, I don't know if you want to add. Sorry.
Sure, sorry. No, thanks a lot for the question. I think it's really important. Definitely we had some struggles, and we will have some struggles when we work in this European context of different, even the kind of nuances which are lost sometimes when you use the term nature-based solutions or green infrastructure and so on. So we're really working on it, and what we have done sometimes, for instance, in France, right, we had this issue of like, oh, but nature-based solutions is not something people will even understand. So how do they want to use it? And then just to let them use the concept, for them to understand that concept, but not to kind of put it out in the public, because I think it takes time, it takes some trust, it takes some, it definitely is a process. And over time, we also saw that, as Julia was mentioning, the seedbed term, it was so interesting that every city was able to pick it up and understand the concept and be like, okay, yeah, what you're doing is really interesting, and we are on board with the seedbed idea because it kind of gives the idea of planting seeds on the ground, and it's easy language to kind of, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. No, those are really a great question, and I feel like this concept of language has actually come up multiple times in the conference so far, where we're talking about, hey, we really have to be cognizant not only in, for example, do we understand what nature-based solutions are, or do we talk about blue-green infrastructure, but it's also about like redefining terms and then defining new terms, I think, that can help minimize either power structures or help build more of a language and kind of community of trust. So I think that's a really great question. Thank you. And we've got one more question opportunity here. If we can hand the mic over to our gentleman on the third row. Yep.
Hi, I'm David from Nature of Cities. Plus one on the language question. It's really important for us to not use the words that we use in a room like this when we're talking to other people. We need to use the words that they use. My question is, so you did a bunch of, you had various techniques that you used, the surveys, the seed beds, and so on. Based on your participation and how they went, do you feel like you had already identified groups that either didn't come or didn't respond well to those? Immigrant groups in particular I'm wondering about, but anybody, can you tell us who wasn't there given the methods that you used?
Maybe I can share one insight into one of the seedbed intervention when we had in Tallinn, for instance. So they are doing their urban parks with trying to make it more accessible, to change the orchard that already exists, but to make it kind of something that could be usable by everyone. And then the problem was, I think I heard before as well, about drug users. So there's a lot of drug users in that area who are kind of well, let's say the city sometimes sees them as nuisances, right? But then in the end, like we were also discussing with them, is there a way to actually like find kind of a middle ground? Is there a way to like also have them on board to understand what are their needs? And somebody said their needs will always remain, but how to kind of still hear them, still talk to them, not destroy the whole place and make it green and shiny, but also to make sure that the people that we are kind of displacing are people that have come on board somehow, at least to understand why we are doing what we are doing. So this was something I felt was something unique in not having that target group. I know it's a target group that you don't necessarily go to, but just generally, it was one of the key things there.
Maybe just quickly to add to this, to your question, but I think I'm sure that we definitely missed out on some user groups, but not intentionally, because we tried to do our best with this really big stakeholder mapping, continuously talking with the city partners and the stakeholders, and pushing the cities really to meet up with the local stakeholders from time to time, without us, with us, having a translator during Zoom meetings, for example, etc. It's long, this list, but for that, actually, we are doing soon, or we already did one, in Lati, focus group discussions where we try to find out who we maybe missed out on. Maybe we can hear some other voices, and afterwards we will analyze that and hope to maybe catch up with the ones we missed, so to say, next year then. So it's an ongoing process, and really, also tackling our our time here, but yeah, we are happy to do that. So.
Thank you all for your questions. We'll move on and actually go to our colleagues that are joining us online. And so we're actually going to introduce the GID checklist. And if I'm not mistaken, Ben, who you can see online, he is actually going to share his own presentation and deliver a little bit more of that information to you.
Hey everyone, Ben, if I'm correct, I'm the one speaking first here. So I will start on the importance actually of GID to come to the GID checklist a little bit later on. Briefly, we want to stress from the GID panel the importance of including GID perspectives in the things we do within this project. And for example, in looking into those nature-based solutions. So as Shreya already mentioned, GID refers to gender inclusion and diversity. And actually, those benefits of the NbS, of the nature-based solutions, are determined by, or possibly determined by, several individual characteristics, such as gender, age, sexuality, ethnicity, as already also has been mentioned, and disability, for example. And also, on the other hand, NbS can perpetuate existing inequalities and even create new inequalities. So that's something we want to be aware of, or make people aware of, because diverse minority and marginalized groups or people can be underrepresented in the process of designing and implementing those NbS. So just to make it a point of attention also, the necessity to involve diverse minority groups and marginalized groups into the co-creation process of NbS, and to investigate those who benefit from the NbS and why that could be one of the topics that we want to look into. So actually really look into who will benefit from this, why will they benefit from this, and are there groups that we haven't been able to reach at this point and should be included more, to really have everyone in that pool of benefits of the NbS aspects that are being developed. So I think we can go to the next slides. Yeah, two questions that we really feel are important when looking into designing and implementing the NbS is for whom, and why are the NbS being implemented as a central question, and who reaps or actually benefits from the NbS. Next slide, please. Thank you. And that's when we come actually to the checklist and the panel. So as already briefly it has been mentioned, the project, or the GoGreenRoutes project, has a GID panel that actually has been consisting of several disciplines, several partners that are actually possessing professional experience and commitment to the broader concept of diversity and inclusion. So actually are interested and have some experiences with the GID concept, and mainly on a voluntary basis. So we actually, with the GID panel, we want to put GID on the agenda within the consortium's activities and with our partners and within the cities, and even broader beyond the project, we would like to reach people designing, for example, the NbS actions and making those points aware to them. We also actively developed a strategy and framework to integrate diverse perspectives into the co-creation and co-evaluation processes of NbS employed by the cities partnering with the consortium. One of the things that we actually developed with the GID panel to actually make it more concrete to cities and to partners is the GID checklist, which is actually a tool for researchers and practitioners to apply when developing their tasks to ensure that gender, inclusion, and diversity has actually totally been taken into consideration within the development process and what we do here. So then I give the words to Ben.
Thank you, Evelyn. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having us here today. Also, thank you for the great work that you're doing, for allowing us to join online, because this is really nice. I will briefly say something, and I'll try to do my best to not elaborate too much about it. But what we try to do within the consortium is, once we had established that GID panel, as Evelyn mentioned, where people basically on a voluntarily basis were dedicated their time, because it was kind of like beyond what was agreed on in the proposal, we started with investigating, okay, like, what actually do we understand under gender inclusion and diversity? What are important aspects here? And also what is happening already in the consortium? What kind of resources do we have? And what are we maybe still missing? And that's when we developed a framework mostly for a common understanding of the concept amongst ourselves. So it involves gender equality, intergenerational perspectives, also the integration of refugees and immigrants, also the inclusion of people with disabilities and LGBTQI plus rights. I will go over all the categories, but I won't go into full depth for each category, because there is limited time for that. However, I'm pleased to say that we have submitted our paper for this. We've written a paper on the framework, on the checklist, and so we hope that it will get published soon, and that we can also distribute the paper amongst the ones that are interested, so they can also read about this. So gender equality, so we need actually that strategies for women to be involved in the decision-making processes, but also we need to consider gender-specific, or gender-sensitive outcomes. I think when it comes to gender, Annika will later share some great insights, so I'll just go over this a bit quicker. Intergenerational perspectives just means that you need to consider both the elderly and young people, because they're often overlooked. And for example, for young people, we know that a lot of young people are suffering from climate anxiety, and that it has shown to be beneficial if they can actually actively engage in something that something like that might have a climate mitigating effect, or because it's very empowering, and for concepts that are generally well, pretty abstract and big, and you can't really tackle them easily on a day-to-day basis. This can really this can just really help in that regard as well. When we talk about integration of refugees and immigrants, we know that generally within the European Union, that they live in densely populated areas that have less access to green space. There's also, and I mean, this is a very general statement, but also there's just, we came across a lot of concepts that, like, it's just also, it requires specific attention to integrate these people in the co-creation process, but also in the decision-making process, because there might be other barriers that they experience than other parts of the population. And I think the question that was previously asked about language also involves this, because you need to consider the language that you use also to be able to actually involve people. And now I move to the next slide, although I did not do this myself, so this is quite weird. However, so when we talk about inclusion of people with disabilities, there's generally a lack of consideration for this group. We also have very limited information on this group, which is actually, which imposes a barrier for having them meaningfully involved in the process, because if you don't know, for example, in the geographic area where they are, then you also don't know, like, am I actually getting, well, not necessarily correct representation, but am I involving them? Because if you don't have the data, you don't know if you are involving the right people or not. So it's really important that we also just gather, that we have more data available on this, and that we obviously also treat that data in an ethical manner. So that's also an important part. Then talking about LGBTQI plus rights, it's just important to know that in many countries within the European Union, and well, even more so outside of the European Union, I would say, these people face significant legal and societal challenges, such as criminalization, medicalization. And you might wonder, how is this related to nature-based solutions? Well, we basically, and I didn't mention this before, but if you want people to be engaged in the co-creation process, it's kind of like something that happens in the public space. So if you need to consider how people access public space, how they use public space, and by what it is influenced, before you can also, like, know who can be involved in the co-creation process. So we know that these societal challenges often limit people within this group to participate in many other aspects of, like, what we would call, like, public life, which takes place in the public area. So we need to also be, because public spaces are not necessarily designed to facilitate that, and there's also societal norms and societal stigma that might also limit these people's use of public spaces. So they might feel a little limited also to use the place, and that will have an effect on participation in these co-creation processes as well. Moreover, also we know that these inequalities that they face will also exacerbate when climate change continues to worsen, and a lot of the practices that have been undertaken to climate mitigation, but also like climate disaster management, basically reflect heteronormative and cisnormative practices, which is just ethically unfair because these populations are being, I am not ready to move yet, are not involved in, or not always being heard when these practices are being discussed. And now I'm ready to move to the next slide. So how do we apply this knowledge in a real world setting? And I would say that this is an ongoing struggle. We have tried to do a lot thanks to the very engaged members of our panel. However, this is still ongoing, and it will also, after the project, be an ongoing struggle because this is a very, it's just big to tackle. But how do we apply? So the knowledge kind of like that we mapped in that framework, how we operationalize that, because that's ultimately like what is most important, I would say, is the GID checklist. So the GID checklist basically has 3 big components. So it talks about engagement with the public, covering parts that things you need to consider when you are engaging with the public. So that goes about accessibility of the place where you are organizing an event, or the time, and accessibility, I mean, like, how do people get there? What's the location? But also on site, is it accessible, for example, for wheelchairs? Then the second part is communication. And communication is actually, I refer again to the question that was previously asked, which I thought was very interesting, around language, because within communication that actually entails language, which means that there we have elements that focus on how to communicate, which language to use. For example, when you ask about people's, what their nationality is, like what are the sensitivities around that, but also their gender identity, and such things, but also the kind of images that you use. Because if you are inviting people to an event and then you have an image of a woman and a man and a child, like that will have that's perfectly fine. I'm not here to judge, but it's perfectly fine. But you need to be reflective and know that that will also have an impact in who you will attract and who you will not. It will be different. So also to be considerate of that, because I also consider that as language. Then there's a third part, which is reflecting upon engagement with the public. And that's actually linked to another very interesting question that was previously asked by someone in the audience. And that is, first question is, who do you expect will engage? And that is based on demographic information that you have of the area. But then the second question, which I think is the most exciting, interesting question, is who actually did participate and who did not? And that's the question that was previously asked. I was very happy to hear that, because that's actually a really important question to ask. And that's something that then in your process, in the iterative process, you can reflect on and think, okay, we did not include these people, but they are there. What are the reasons for that? And then you can move on. So that's the third part that we developed. I'll go a bit faster because I realize I've been talking for quite a while. So beyond the checklist, there's many more things that would be interesting to investigate for us, which is, it often actually remains unclear. We know kind of like theoretically that there might be barriers, but it has not really been investigated too much. So it would be essential to investigate lived experience of people in these different groups to actually know what kind of barriers they experience, so that we can also facilitate accordingly. And then this is something that is, I have mentioned many times, just in conversations with people in all kinds of projects, is that there's an urgency to always make explicit who was involved throughout the NbS life cycle, but also at which level of participation, so that we are just kind of like, that people are also able to assess from, okay, like, this was the level of participation that was achieved, and these were the people involved. And like, it's fine. Like, it does not always have to be that the whole city made the decision, but we need to like be transparent on that. So, and then I'll just finish with this statement. So this is kind of like the take-home message from our part, is that there are empirical arguments to contest that NbS will, by default, deliver on equity and justice goals. So that means we need to actively develop strategies and continue our endeavors to make sure that they actually do deliver on these justice goals. So voila, and I will end with this. Thank you.
Wonderful. And then we'll pass it over to Annika, who is, again, with the city of Umeå, and she is a gender equality officer. Go ahead, Annika.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you very much for this invitation to be here today, even if it's digital. I'll try to be brief, so I'll just go over, I'll talk a little bit about the context on how we work with gender equality in the city of Umeå, which is one of the partner cities in this GoGreenRoutes project. And then I'll go into two specific examples of how we've applied gender equality perspectives in, especially in dialogue about urban planning. And then I'll try to leave some time for enough time for questions, so I'm happy to go into more detail in the end. But just to give you a general context, Umeå is a city in the north of Sweden. We have about 130,000 inhabitants, and we're a growing city. We have had continuous population growth since the 1960s. So that's also kind of a reality that we're working with to make sure that this growth is sustainable and with green spaces and social sustainability, etc. And we have worked with gender equality in the city for more than 3 decades, and it's both in the political structure. So we have a gender equality committee of elected politicians, and also to gender equality officers, so kind of in the public administration. And the overall goal for the gender equality work in Umeå is that the municipality should create conditions for women and men to have equal power to shape society as well as their own lives. And since this is kind of like an overall goal, that means that all the different departments of the municipality should actively work within their area of work to contribute to this goal. So for example, the Streets and Parks Department, how do they work with contributing to making sure that we create conditions for women and men to have equal power to shape society as well as their own lives? I just put here on the right, we have this publication in English. If you want to read more afterwards, I can share the link about other examples of how we work with gender equality, because I don't have time to go into too many details in this really brief presentation. But just to give you a little bit more context, when we work with gender equality in relation to urban planning, we use a method that we call the gendered landscape, which is basically kind of trying to always integrate this understanding of gendered power structures and the life conditions of women and men and different groups in our city, and how these different intersecting power structures affect what kind of lives can be lived in our city, and how do different groups based on their life conditions interact with the place. And what we try to do is to go beyond looking at a specific place. For example, if we're working in a park, look beyond just that specific park and who's moving here today, but try to have kind of this overview of the the gendered landscape of the city. What does the labor market look like, for example? Who works where? And what does that mean in terms of where people move in the city, at what times of the day? Who has access to different types of modes of transportation? What does that mean in terms of which groups have access to certain places, etc., etc.? And two kind of factors that are very important in order to be able to do this mapping is to have gender segregated data, because I'm talking gender in this presentation, but of course like data segregated so you can look at different types of groups, but also to work with dialogue as well, to really kind of understand life conditions of different groups. And I'm going to go into two examples, just one kind of more of a larger scale example of dialogue, and then I'll go into a very, very specific example to give you an idea. The first one is this citizen dialogue that we did in 2019. So we're very happy. It was like a large scale project. So we're very happy that we planned it for the fall of 2019, because then after that, it was kind of difficult to do this kind of work for a few years for reasons that we all know. And what we did was we bought a bike, an electric bike that you can see down in the bottom right corner that also doubles as a table. And we went around to all the different neighborhoods in our city and had a dialogue about their neighborhood with the inhabitants of that neighborhood. What we did was that we used Google Maps, which is a really good tool, where you can see in a specific neighborhood where you have movement. So we looked at where are people moving around in this neighborhood and at what time. And usually it was kind of like late afternoon outside the supermarket in the local neighborhood. That's where we would find the most movement of people. So we went there with our bike and put it up as a table and talked to the inhabitants. We had around 700 in-person conversations. And we also have had, as you can see on the image, a map where we also, you also have the digital possibility to participate in this dialogue. And what we did was we asked them to plot good and bad spaces. And we also asked two additional questions, which was, if you would move from this neighborhood, what would you miss? And what would you wish for your neighborhood in 20 years? And this kind of really broad dialogue, what we used it for then is to kind of get input to this mapping, this report that you see on the left-hand side. This is a really big, really comprehensive report of each neighborhood in the city, which is used as a basis for future developments of our city, as we are a growing city. So we want to make sure, like, how do we, as we grow, make sure that we really kind of build on what's already good in the neighborhoods and address problematic areas, and that we have a comprehensive kind of basis dialogue. Also in this context, I can also say that one thing that people really mentioned the highest on an overall scale was that they would miss if they would move was nature, even higher than their own home. Nature was the top scorer. So that's also really kind of an input to say that that's an important factor for well-being in the city. But I wanted to also give you like more specific and more kind of gender equality focused example. And as Julia mentioned before in this presentation, an important factor is to kind of make sure that we involve those who are not otherwise part of the urban planning process, and also maybe try to use creative methods for dialogue. And in this case, what we did, this is from when we developed a section of a riverside walk, a park by the river in our city. And maybe I'll do a provocative statement, which is that maybe sometimes you don't need to include everyone. This was the basis for this process. We applied what we called inclusion through exclusion. So as a basis for this specific process for this place was that we know on the one hand that young girls are a group that are very seldom heard in traditional kind of citizen dialogues about public space. And we also know, on the other hand, that when we build spaces in public space for young people, we tend to build spaces for physical activity, such as a skateboard park, for example. And our local data shows that girls stop doing sports at an earlier age than boys. So if we do that, we disproportionately invest our tax money in boys. So in this specific process, we only talk to teenage girls, and we excluded everybody else. Speaking of creative methods, we also worked together with a local university and developed workshops based on art and dance and other types of methods. So it wasn't just sitting around the table and asking, what do you want for this place? But we talked about how does it feel to be a young girl in Umeå today, about entitlement, security, etc. And things that came up was that they felt a lot of double expectations all the time. And what they wished was a place where you could kind of just hang out with your friends, feel safe, and don't feel all these double expectations. And I see that time is running out, so I'll just click to this last slide, and this is the final result of that process. So what we did, for example, is that we created this place in the park that are swings that you can sit in. You can sit alone, or you can sit together with friends to hang out. There are a lot of ways to enter and exit the space, which was really important because they wanted to have like an overview and be able to kind of get away if they had to and see who's moving without feeling that you're sitting on a stage. Focus on well lit, etc. But also one important thing about kind of the physical design of, for example, seats in a park. Whose body gets to be the norm when we design the seats. So here, these backrests of these swings, they are made for a person who's 165 centimeters tall, which is the average height of women in Sweden today. So that's also part of kind of the critical questions that we need to ask. Whose body gets to be the model for the model person that gets to be comfortable in public space? And I know we only have 10 minutes left for this session, so I'm going to quit talking, but I'm happy to answer questions and send links, etc.
Thank you, Annika. Thank you, Ben and Eveline. So we do have another opportunity for question and answer. I do have one question that I'll start with, and then I'll hand it over to the audience. And then, of course, if there's time, I've got a number more. But Annika, I'll start with being that you're the gender equality officer, and I think it's really important to recognize that Umeå has a gender equality officer, which is really exciting when we're thinking about how to support equality in our cities. It is also important to recognize that not all municipalities are going to have that same resource at this stage. And so, Annika, if you had to give just kind of a single like first step to creating a more just and gender equal urban landscape for other municipalities to follow suit, what would that be?
I think that one important takeaway is that there's no, which was also said previously in the session, that there's no like one size fits all solution. And I think that it's really important to kind of start from the local context, which is different for every city. So I think that one thing that's necessary whichever intervention you want to do is to have good data, to understand, like, what does this city look like for different groups? And there's a lot of like good tools, such as the GID panel checklist, but also a lot of other tools out there to kind of help you figure out, like, what are these critical questions that we want to ask to kind of understand what the city looks like. But I think that if you want to have like to be able to do something, especially in a context where there are not a lot of maybe resources for this type of work, to be able to kind of have kind of underline what you want to do with facts, to be able to show that, look, this is what the data says about how different groups access the city, live their lives in the city. I think that's that's like the important starting point. To look at the data and see, like, and also to kind of see what's the biggest problem. We can't solve all the problems at the same time. So like, where is kind of the biggest issue to solve?
Wonderful. Thank you, Annika. Well, and so with the time that we have remaining, I see we've already got some hands raised. So we'll go ahead and kick it over to the audience. To get started, we've got on the second row right there in the middle.
So it's a really beautiful thing when you start to have people that, you know, organically say, hey, let's make a seed box or whatnot, and talking about gender, inclusion, and diversity. And I'm just wondering how you are involving these individuals in like retrospective or reflective, reflexivity, whatever you want to call about it, is when you're actually after the fact, because when we're moving from, say, unconscious incompetence to actually moving to a place where we're actually recognizing, and sometimes we, you know, as researchers see this and we can see that this is what's happening and we're starting to include and this is engaging people, but then actually helping to give that safe space for these individuals to recognize it for themselves and kind of see the change. And I was just wondering how you're facilitating those conversations. And you mentioned focus groups and stuff, and I'd just love to hear a little bit more.
Who would like to start with that? Julia?
I can start maybe quickly. Yeah, exactly. Focus group discussions are our tool or method to use now. We are about to do them in all of the cities, maybe also twice in some of them, because of course we need to pay attention to the fact that not every city is the same in process matters. We need to pay attention to this fact that not every NbS intervention is at the same time implemented in each city. This was a big discussion, but it's due to a lot of facts, the reality. And so, yeah, depends on the needs the citizens and the city partner shared with us. We at least will do one focus group discussion, which will include, first of all, members of a local task force, but also is open to other participants who want to join the focus group discussions. Of course, we can't expect that we have a really, I don't know, like 30, 40 people in the room. Maybe sometimes it's just 3 or 4 people, because it's really hard to keep them motivated also in a way. But yeah, for that reason, I mentioned that we may be doing it twice, or we will do an online survey. We will reach out to each city individually and talk with them afterwards if they think it was a success, or should we do something differently. We will travel to the cities because we realize that this is a really big win-win situation if we are on site speaking with the people, even if we are not fluent in the language there, because there was also the topic of language issues. But there is a way if you want to to communicate. This is what I learned in a way. I don't know.
I think I'm good. Yeah,
Okay.
I think you covered
Okay, well, yeah, especially in the interest of time. I saw at least one other hand. Yeah, so we've got Ilka in the, what is that, the 5th row in the middle?
Yes, thank you. This one goes to Annika. Hey, Jag heter Ilkka. Jag kom from Finland, Lahtis. And I know that, like you in Sweden, you have dark winter and you have snow there also. So how you take care of that when you are planning and designing green environments?
Great question. And Ilkka, next time we meet in a conference, I'll try to answer in Finnish. I'm doing Duolingo. I'm on day streak 75 in Finnish, but not yet.
Okay.
So,
Jag väntar dig.
But yeah, that's a really good question. And speaking about kind of in this project of kind of the local contextualized, the contextual kind of differences between the different cities participating in a project, that's been something that's very like particular to Umeå when we're building, for example, the parks as part of this project. Like there are only a few months a year that we can build them. We can only do things certain times of year when it comes to planting trees, etc. Oh well. But I think that one thing that we really work on when it comes to, I mean, in an English-speaking context, we often talk about green spaces, but we don't always use the word green in Swedish because that would it's not really green spaces all the time, but rather like outdoor spaces. And what we really try to do in our local planning is to make sure that the spaces for example, different types of parks in the city can also be used and function all year round. So for example, we try to build hills that can also be used as toboggan, like or what do you call it, like snow slide slopes in winter, to have an active use of the spaces all year round. And also the issue that you mentioned about lighting also becomes like that's something we have to also think about, to make sure that we have lighting, because otherwise we'll have dark parks at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But I think that one really important issue is to think about how can this space be used not only 3 months a year when you can sit on the grass in a park, but rather like all year round. Can we, for example, we have a park in the center where we build a snowboard slope in the winter. So that's a quick answer, but yeah.
Okay, tack så mycket, Annika.
It's an issue that we have to consider.
Thank you. Yes, and I will say, unfortunately, we are over time at the moment, and I know there is a coffee break that many of us are probably looking forward to. In that coffee break, though, if you haven't had an opportunity to ask your question of any of us that are on the stage, please don't hesitate to come up to us. For those our virtual presenters, our online presenters, if you have questions for them, please don't hesitate to come chat with me, and I'm happy to relay those questions on and get you in connection. But I guess when we think about wrapping everything up, and our initial question is, are nature-based solutions just? The big thing is to recognize is they're not inherently just. They can be, as long as we make a space to really be intentional about gender inclusion and diversity topics. And I think something that's been addressed as well is the import of and impact of things like language, as well as this really, in a lot of ways, iterative process of recognizing, okay, so who are we targeting? Were they present? And then how do we go forward from here to make a seat at the table for them? And that will go for those of us that are researchers. How do we really think of that? For municipalities, how do we, regardless of our resources, whether we have the resources to have a designated officer, or if it's just taking it to the community and starting to see what we can really do. When we think about our GID panel, for example, it very much blossomed out of the passion and desire on a volunteer basis for us to put this as a key part of our consortium. And so we do hope that, if nothing else, you've been inspired to really think about GID in your own works, in your own future projects, and how this can not just be that thing that is kind of the volunteer, but it really does have a key kind of cornerstone element in any discussion, nature-based solutions going forward. So that being said, thank thank you so much for your time and your attention, and I will let you head for that coffee.